Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. How should we describe the era we all live in today? Has using the term post-Cold War become meaningless? What is the dominant trend? Growing multipolarity or the West's drive for absolute security and hegemony? Or is it just chaos? To CrossTalk, the age we all live in, I'm joined by my guest, Pepe Escobar in Sao Paulo. He is a roving correspondent for Asia Times and author of the new book, Empire of Chaos. In Phoenix, we have Patrick Henningsen. He is a journalist, writer, and founder of the news website, 21stCenturyWire.com. And in Washington, we cross to James Carafano. He is the Heritage Foundation's vice president, as well as a leading expert in national security and foreign policy challenges. All right, gentlemen, CrossTalk rules. In fact, that means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Pepe, you just published a book, Empire of Chaos. Why Empire of Chaos, and why the stress on chaos? Go ahead, Pepe.
Well, first of all, the book is very interesting. It's a collection of columns that I've been writing since 2009 to 2014. And when I assembled the columns, there was an Ariadne thread to all that, which was the empire breeding chaos all the time and receiving blowback by chaos from all over the world, especially in that area that the Pentagon calls the arc of instability, from the Maghreb to Xinjiang in Western China. So if you read the columns, the first column, just to give you an idea, was the relationship between Osama bin Laden, Obama in the beginning of his first term, and Medvedev when he was still president of Russia. So this looks like it was 10,000 years ago, right? Not really. Then the whole thing changed, and it got downhill very fast. Libya, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Yemen, and of course, the simultaneous Cold War 2.0 by the US against China, the pivoting to Asia, and Ukraine as the new Berlin Wall in Kiev. So this is what you're going to get in 600 pages. Here's the culprit with his very simple modernist cover.
Okay, all right, Pepe.
600 pages inside, you had chaos plus chaos.
You covered a lot of material right there. James in Washington, would you call this the age of chaos right now? Because we've all used the term post Cold War, post 9/11. When do we start living in the present? Is it the age of chaos?
Yeah. So I know you've had some terrible technical difficulties, but I couldn't hear a word that he said. But just to answer your question, I often think the people that are living in an age are the least ones qualified to describe what's happening. So, the people that lived through the 30 Years' War, they didn't know they were having a 30 Years' War. So if you remember back just a couple of years ago, we had Kaplan's book, Age of Anarchy, and so this is anything new. What I will say is this is a troubling time. Things are more disconnected than they were 6 years ago. I think that's true, and that's what some of this reaction is to that.
Patrick, but I guess it gets down to who's making things happen and who's reacting to them. I mean, when we looked at what Pepe just had to say there, I mean, it's basically you have colored revolutions, you have the Arab Spring, and and when we look at it after the fact, we look at causality and the result. And Libya is a really perfect example. Is that the best of intentions to go in and help people destroyed a country, absolutely. And now you go back, oh my goodness, we have to go back to Iraq, and it's the same pattern over and over again. It seems to me the term, this era of chaos really does apply because this is this exporting of forced political change, and it originates from the West. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yes, I actually disagree with the previous comments that were just spoken about. I think in this age we can evaluate the state of the world. We can evaluate events. Because the events, the cycles of events are so rapid now. Things are changing so quickly. Wars and conflicts are coming on the scene every week, every month, it seems. So I can look back at Libya. I just watched some footage, harrowing footage, just last night, actually, about President Obama announcing that we're going into Libya to protect civilians. and we've taken this measure, and it's going to be multilateral with NATO, and it all sounded really good. But the problem is, Peter, and to everybody else, we knew, at least I knew, and many of my colleagues knew at the time, that that was a complete lie. That was a total fabrication. So the problem with U.S. leadership in the new American century is that the major currency, the key to unlocking all these doors, is lies and deception. And we've seen this over and over again. We've seen this with the Maidan Revolution, which is another faux flash mob color revolution in the Ukraine this past winter. So we see this over and over, it's repeating. So I question the U.S. leadership and its ability to not deceive the world or the public or its own voters.
Okay, Pepe, if I can go back to you in Sao Paulo, would you say that Washington is fully aware of the consequences of its policy decisions? And I'm looking back, let's say, since 9/11 to the present, because I'm thinking about terms of blowback. And then there's all these issues about containing Russia, containing China, containing Iran. Are they aware of the consequences of their actions? Go ahead, Pepe.
Exactly. It's a very important flashback, in fact, to 2002, before the invasion and occupation of Iraq. I pay a lateral parallel homage to a French political scientist, Alain Joxe. He's not well known in America, but very well known in France. He wrote L'Empire du Chaos, The Empire of Chaos, French version 2002. And he was analyzing what was going on with neocons in power, of course, in parallel to Wallerstein. And the big question already in 2002 was, is the American empire going to manage its decline in a more or less civilized way, or is it going to be the Samson option and bring down the world with it? So these past 12 years, more or less, we are veering towards the second option for a number of reasons. In terms of the Obama administration, that's where I concentrate on my book, starting in early 2009. Obama doesn't know much about foreign policy. He knows a little bit about the Pacific, but he doesn't know anything about Europe, Middle East, and in fact, even transatlantic relations. It's not part of his upbringing, what he studied later on. And he's surrounded by a bunch of my conservative American friends tell me, the most mediocre foreign policy team in the history of the United States. And I tend to agree with them very well. If you look at Samantha Power, Jarrett, Ben Rhodes, this bunch of absolute idiots, and these are the people who are instilling into Obama key foreign policy moves, from the pivoting to Asia to the new Berlin Wall in Kiev. And obviously, Obama also listens to Dr. Zbigniew Brzezinski, which he's trying to refine his worldview. His last book, just to give an idea, his last book, I think, is 2 years ago. He was preaching for Russia and Turkey to be absorbed into the Western framework and to be players, but obviously the United States would be the arbiter of everything going on in Eurasia. This is completely crazy. At least he's not preaching the U.S. to conquer Eurasia, because he saw what he said in the 1997.
All right, hang on here. Let's have equal time here. I want to have equal time here. James, I hope you heard what Pepe had to say there. Did you hear him?
Yeah, I did that time. So
go ahead.
So I had three comments. First of all, this notion that you can describe international relations and predict where we're going based on what one unilateral actor is doing in the global environment is just kind of laughable. I'm sorry, it's just stupid. The world's a competitive environment. Everybody's playing. Everybody counts. And just looking at what the United States is doing and how it's controlling the world is really, as a book, kind of a joke. The second thing is this notion of an American empire is equally laughable. I mean, we've redefined the word empire to mean everything we don't like. Empire means sovereignty. It means you control the people that you are governing and ruling over. The United States controls America and nothing else. We're influential, but we're not an empire. And trying to look at America through an empire model leads to really, really stupid analysis. But here's what I'll say about Pepe. Look, how can you argue with the guy? This is the worst foreign policy team in modern American history. It just is. It's a very amateurish team. They're very insular. They have a very kind of insular view of the world. They are failing. They've been failing for 6 years, and their instinct when things don't work is to double down on what they're doing. So look, I can't defend American foreign policy, but to put this in kind of a grander scale, I mean, I think that book's just about 10 years premature. But I'm sure people will buy it, Pepe, so no worries.
Patrick, let's stay with the empire term, because I think a lot of people would disagree with James. James has his right to his opinion, and I love having him on the program because he's very good with his opinion. But what do you think about that, Patrick? The word empire. It works for a lot of people.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think James is kind of casually trying to minimize what the U.S. is actually projecting in the world. And, you know, from Washington, D.C. bubble, you might be able to do that. But the reality is you can't say that the U.S. doesn't project empire, doesn't project force, doesn't use force. Last time I counted, the U.S. has bombed probably about 30 countries, has overthrown 50 governments, has suppressed about 20 nationalist or populist movements around the world, and has attempted 50 political assassinations of other countries. And that's not even talking about the military adventurism that we've seen in the last decade and a half. So, and I can go back further if you'd like.
Yeah, so
I think it's laughable, James, that you could say...
The United States was also one of the leading powers, along with Russia, in crushing fascism, right? And I don't hear people complaining about that. So your notion of just cherry-picking some things.
James,
you've
hold
just
on,
redefined empire to be being mean.
Go ahead.
James, can I finish my segment, James?
Go ahead, Patrick.
Can I finish my segment?
20 seconds.
James, the United States has backed a pro-fascist and also neo-Nazi sympathizing government in Kiev. And I don't think there's any argument about that, unless, of course, you're in the Washington bubble.
I think there's a big argument about that.
So to say that the U.S. is anti-fascist, that's an antiquated analysis.
All right, gentlemen, I'm sorry. I have to jump in. I have to jump in, gentlemen. We're going to go to a short break. And after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on the empire of chaos. Stay with us. All right, I'd like to go back to Patrick in Phoenix. I got a bit heated right there, Patrick. I want you to be able to finish your point, and I'd like to give James in Washington the opportunity to react if he so wishes. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest oversights that a lot of people have is that fascism is not something from the 20th century. There's been a reemergence of fascism. If you go by the definition of fascism being the configuration of government and corporate interests together moving forward as one unit, that's what we have today. That's what the United States embodies with its militarism. Its military is a corporate security, essentially, in Iraq and Afghanistan. So our boys are not fighting for freedom or democracy. They're fighting for U.S. interests, which are corporate interests. That, by definition, is fascism. We are backing fascists in Kiev, and we are backing other fascist interests around the world by our nature of our foreign policy. So I just want to correct what James said, in my opinion.
Okay, let James react to that. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, look, Patrick, I'm sure you're a great guy. And I don't believe you're living a bubble in Phoenix, and I don't believe that Pepe is living a bubble in Brazil. But what I really don't appreciate is if we're going to have a dialogue, don't be telling me where I'm coming from and what I'm thinking and what I'm saying. That's my only point. Otherwise, we really can't have a discussion, which I do think is important. I think people want to understand why there is chaos going on in the world, and it's a legitimate concern, and the world is a much less safer place than it was a decade ago. We could have a real honest discussion about that, and I think that's where we ought to go.
Okay, Pepe, do you want to jump in here? Go ahead.
Okay, let me talk about the future, in fact. If the U.S. acts as an empire and a crumbling empire, it's very simple. Read my book, 600 pages, all over the world. I don't live in Brazil. I live all over the world. I'm a nomad. I'm a global rover. So I'm not stuck in Phoenix or in Washington or whatever. I am all over the place. So it's all there in the book. It's very simple. Now let's talk about the serious stories for the next 10 years, where we will see how the empire disintegrates, in what fashion, or even if it turns into a benign empire. With Hillary Clinton as president in 2017, I'm not betting on it. But anyway, so most important stories ahead. Integration of the BRICS countries. The flight away from the petrodollar. which includes not only Russia, China, Iran, but other players as well, such as Venezuela, and even along the way, Brazil as well. The integration of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, especially moved by Russia and China, and getting other members, which will include Iran, India, and Pakistan. And most importantly, the developing countries' roles inside the G20. The past G20 was very, very clear. While we had a triad of absolutely stupid Anglo-Saxons saying that Putin is the next Hitler, just like Hillary Clinton, by the way, we had the BRICS talking among themselves, doing deals, Russia and China doing more deals, and promising more deals with developing countries that were present inside the G20 as well. This is going to be more and more important in the next few years. And the big story, which is, what is the meaning of the new Silk Roads in China, which has everyone from Angela Merkel to the Iranian leadership to the Kremlin salivating with these prospects. This, in a nutshell, is Eurasia integration.
Okay.
This means, I'll tell you.
Let me go to James. No. This is a big point. I want to go to James with this one.
Okay, I'll go back to it.
Because I think it's really important here. Almost everything Pepe just mentioned right there, James, is a world without the West. And this is something that's talked a lot about. I think in the National Interest in the last issue, they had an article about this, how Asian countries, the South and the East are building these institutions beyond Western control. And I'm thinking, an analog to the World Bank, to the IMF, to even the WTO. I mean, how do you think about that? I mean, Pepe brought it up. The next 10 years, what's your reaction?
No, I think that's an awesome point. I think it's where the discussion ought to go, because to sit here and dwell on the chaos and how we got here, I mean, that's going to be easy to see 10 years down the road when we look back. But what is important to look forward. So those are all great issues. Some of them I agree with, some of them I don't. Integration of the BRICS, that ain't going to happen. Their interests are too disparate. The notion that that's going to be some kind of unifying bloc in the world, I think, is kind of laughable. Look, a world without the West doesn't make a whole lot of sense, particularly if you look at it from the energy perspective. The United States is going to be a massive net energy exporter, and that's going to be really, really important. There are parts of the world which really are going to be transformative. I think the Arctic is going to be not a game-changing economic unit, but I think there's going to be a lot of wealth and development there, and I actually think it's going to make people's lives better. He didn't say the Middle East, which is a big problem, because I think the Middle East is a pot of chaos and is going to be that way for a long time. I think the fault line between Russia and the West is troubling and concerning. And I think the competition in Asia is going to be, I believe, healthy. Maybe I disagree with Pepe. I think America is an Asian power. I think it's going to continue to be an Asian power. And if I were a betting guy, I would bet 50-50 that the United States and China are going to learn how to live together for the next 20 years, and kind of we're all going to be better off. But those are all great points to discuss.
Okay, Patrick.
I hope so.
Okay, Pepe, you want to jump in real quick? Go ahead, and then I'll go to Patrick. Go ahead.
No. Patrick first.
Okay, Patrick. James mentioned the troubling relationship that the West and Russia have, and I want to ask all of you on the program: are we in a new Cold War, or did the old one never really end? What's your perspective on that one, Patrick?
Well, when the Iron Curtain fell and when the Berlin Wall fell, the United States simply accelerated its move eastward. So they built up NATO to a more aggressive stance towards Russia. We're currently encircling Russia. And here's the problem, not just with the UN or with the G20 or working groups like Bilderberg, but NATO itself represents something really dangerous, because if the United States can't do a military action from its own national platform, what it does is it just goes and does it through the NATO door. So this, in a way, is kind of deceptive. The North Atlantic Treaty should have been disbanded in the 90s, but instead it's become something more of an offensive organization. That, to me, represents a kind of Anglo-American empire, if you will, and that's projecting the kind of hegemony that I think is very dangerous right now in the world.
Okay, James, I don't know if you saw it. I think it was about 2 weeks ago when there was this a State Department briefing, and I think it was a military man. Maybe he was a general, maybe he was in the Navy, but he was saying that, you know, Russia's moving towards NATO, and that clip got a lot of play here in Russia because it was really kind of laughable, and we'll use the word that you like to use on this program, and, you know, but really it's NATO moving towards Russia. I mean, that's at least a fact, okay? But, you know, you can, from the Russian perspective, it does look threatening because it is a military alliance. How did it get to this point? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, the threat of NATO is really kind of an inside joke. I mean, look, NATO military spending and force structure has been declining for 20 years. So saying NATO is encircling Russia is kind of like saying Custer was encircling the Indians at the Little Bighorn. I mean, the math just literally does not add up in any way.
No.
But I think, that's simply true.
Bad metaphor.
Bad metaphor.
Oh, it may be a bad metaphor, but the numbers are absolutely true. NATO military power has been declining. It's less of a threat to Russia.
NATO
than
is
it's ever
supplying
been,
arms
so I'm
to
not
the
really
Ukraine.
Sure where you're coming from.
Go ahead, Patrick.
Okay, and Russia's
NATO
not sending
supplying arms to the Ukraine, lethal aid to the Ukraine.
Right, I get that. And Russia isn't sending any
No, not the rebels,
Russian
the
arms
government
in
in Kiev.
I got that.
I think, James, we're on a different planet here.
All right, you guys, we're not going to resolve. We're not going to resolve the Ukraine crisis on this program here. I understand there are different points of view. Okay, Pepe, let me go back to you. Let's look at the Cold War issue here. Is this a continuation of the past one? Because if in one way you can say it is a continuation because there wasn't the liquidation, the complete liquidation of one of the players in the Cold War. Russia, from Russia's perspective, opted out of the Cold War. But there are plenty of people in Washington don't see that. They see it was just a continuation. Go ahead.
No, they don't. The Beijing leadership, if you scrutinize carefully what they say, and what is filtered, especially through some editorials, they consider NATO a relic from the past. They don't even bother about it. In fact, they want to beef up the SCO not as an antidote against NATO. It's not a military alliance, the SCO. The SCO, the main interest is business, is trade. I've seen some of the roundtables of the SCO, and they only discuss business. This is the most important aspect. Cold War still on, of course. Professor Stephen Cohen said that Cold War never left. I tend to agree with him. At the same time, there is a Cold War 2.0, which was re-engineered by the Obama administration. They didn't even know what they were doing when they were pivoting to China and restarting Cold War against Russia at the same time. This is beyond stupid. And I'm sure our laughable friend in Washington is going to agree with that. Anyway, the most important thing in the future, let me go back to a little story I was going to tell. You know what happened this past Tuesday? The first Chinese block train left Yiwu. Nobody knows where Yiwu is. You know what Yiwu is? It's the largest small commodities wholesale market in the world. It's about 3.5 hours away from Shanghai. So we have a train leaving EU. You know where it's going to end? Madrid. So this is the pre-New Silk Roads in action with old trains,
okay, Pepe, let me jump in here. I want to
in 2025, we're going to have this in...
I need to give James the last word because I'm a man
let me just finish.
I'm a man of my honor here. James, we're going to have some new neocons in Congress. How it's going to change American foreign policy?
No, but you're cutting the most important point.
In January. Go ahead, James.
Look, actually, I was enjoying listening to Pepe, but I think the Cold War metaphor just doesn't work. Look, the Obama administration spent 6 years trying to reset relations with Russia, so obviously they're beyond the Cold War. If you go down to everything the Cold War represented in the struggle between the Soviet Union and the United States, almost none of those characteristics are here. So I think kind of, sitting and hanging around and fantasizing about the Cold War, concept, it's just incredibly unuseful.
Well,
There's not a lot of people
we've run out of time here. I just wish Washington would move on and stop talking about Cold War. Many thanks to my guests in Sao Paulo, Phoenix, and in Washington, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, CrossTalk rules. I love it.